Natural hygiene history. Natural hygiene history is part of the history of healing and old paradigm. Disease is the problem. This has been the common way to look at disease for millennia and is still very popular. Disease is the problem, and the way to get rid of the disease is to stop the disease symptoms. The cause is mysterious. Fear of inexplicably being struck by disease is typical. Example: a cold is cured when the cold symptoms, sneezing and fever, have been stopped by some concoct. Mysterious cause: perhaps a cold originates from getting too cold, perhaps from bacteria, or what? Example 2. Cancer is cured by attacking the growths with chemo and radiation and operations. The cause is mysterious. A billion-dollar industry is built around cancer research. Hygiene and nature cure appeared in the early 1800s. Here is a look at the historical development of cures. Magic and spirituality. The primitive mind's belief in spirits, which interfere in man's life for good or evil and are able to cause disease, was probably universal, and still is widespread. Evil spirits could enter the body. The solution: rituals, magic rites, offerings and other efforts to appease the invisible higher beings that rule over health and disease. Western medicine really began in ancient Greece. The earliest mythical doctor was the god Asclepios, Lot. Aesculapius, father of the goddess Hygiene. Various diseases were treated by incubation or temple sleeping. The patient made a request of the god, usually for cure, and, while the patient slept within the confines of the temple, probably aided by an opiate, the god visited in a dream. The snakes would crawl over the patient during the night and the patient would wake in the morning cured. The Iroquois of New York and Ontario gathered in the Longhouse for ceremonial and religious purposes. Wooden masks, skillfully but grotesquely carved, played an important part in their ritual, and were alleged to be portraits of the strange quasi-human beings whom the forest hunters met at nightfall, darting from tree to tree, and resembling disembodied heads with long snapping hair. These beings were held to be involved in the cause and cure of disease, and were invoked and worshipped in complex dance rituals, sometimes under the influence of tobacco and or other drugs. Cutting and manipulating surgical methods as a cure were obviously also developed very early in the beginning, probably by cutting out and removing problematic body parts. Acupuncture was used in China before 2500 BC using sharp stones, which were replaced by metal needles around 400 BC. Acupressure, reflexology and some energy methods are probably even older. Evidence that surgery was occasionally practiced in the 4th century BC Asclepian temples in Greece is shown in the following: a man with an ulcer in his stomach. He incubated, and saw a vision. The god seemed to order his followers to seize and hold him that he might incise his stomach. So he fled, but they caught and tied him to the door knocker. The Asclepian opened his stomach, cut out the ulcer, sewed him up again and loosed his bonds. He went away whole, but the floor of his chamber was covered with his blood. If a physician performed a major operation on a signier with a bronze lancet and has caused the signier's death, or he opened the eye socket of a signier and has destroyed the signier's eye, they shall cut off his hand. If a physician performed a major operation on a commoner's slave with a bronze lancet and caused his death, he shall make good slave for slave. Hammurabi's Code, Mesopotamia 3000 BC. It seems in most ancient cultures there is a tradition of working on the feet to help the body balance itself. For instance, in Egypt, in the physician's tomb, 2300 BC, there can be found a pictograph which may be evidence of reflexology being applied. Chundu Sunbup is a 6,000-year-old ancient healing method that uses the power of the original ki energy and is deeply rooted on the Taoist principles of creation of life. The master transmits vital energy by using a particular sound vibration which clears the blockages and stimulates the circulation of energy. Folk medicine. Traditional medicine. Medicinal plants, animal parts and minerals, like mica and gypsum, have been used for a long time to get rid of disease symptoms. Knowledge was often collected and handed down by women. The use of plants as medicine is older than recorded history. As mute witness to this fact, marshmallow root, hyacinth, and yarrow have been found carefully tucked around the bones of a Stone Age man in Iraq. These three medicinal herbs continue to be used today. Marshmallow root is a demulcent herb, soothing to inflamed or irritated mucous membranes, such as a sore throat or irritated digestive tract. Hyacinth is a diuretic that encourages tissues to give up excess water. Yarrow is a time-honored cold and fever remedy that may once have been used much as aspirin is today. Treatment involved plant remedies, of varying pharmacologic effectiveness. The Chippewa around 1925 used around 200 plants in different ways, for the treatment of a wide variety of common ailments, in a manner similar to European herbal folk medicines 2 centuries before. Medicines were given orally, by inhalation or by enema. Often a healer would induce altered consciousness, perhaps in a sweat lodge, would let blood, and use supernatural or magic remedies. Animal ingredients have long been part and parcel of the Chinese pharmacopoeia. Records from 2,000 years ago tell of some 20 animals including snakes and rhinos being used in medicines. Lately, however, TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, has come under fire for its use of animals, especially of endangered species. Heading the list are poaching of rhinos in Africa and tigers in India and Siberia. A team from China's Endangered Species Commission obtained data from 13 TCM manufacturers, which annually consumed 506 kilos of scorpions, 2,796 kilos of freshwater turtle shells, 797 kilos of saiga horn, 29 kilos of bear gall powder, 25 kilos of leopard bone, 3,039 pairs of geckos, and 9,650 centipedes. As there may be as many as 1,000 TCM manufacturers in China, the quantities used nationwide must be mind-boggling. Folk medicine. Major systems with time. Simple folk remedies often became big extensive systems that had to rely on highly educated specialists, e.g. traditional Chinese medicine, Indian Ayurvedic medicine, Greek Arabic medicine. The Greek system, started by Hippocrates, you were governed by a balance of these body types. 1. Sanguine, air, hot/moist. 2. Melancholic, earth, cold, dry. 3. Phlegmatic, water, cold/moist. 4. Choleric, fire, hot/dry. That decided what disease you were prone to get and a cure. Galen, 130 AD, assigned foods and herbs to each of the 4 humors that form the basis of Galenical dietetics and medicine that was accepted throughout Europe and the Middle East for 1,500 years. Arabic medicine derived from Constantinople and followed the armies of Muhammad. The medicine of the Arabic world transmitted classical Roman and Greek traditions to early modern times. They developed new medicines: camphor, saffron, myrrh, musk, iodine, naphtha and senna. They developed chemical methods in preparing the active principle of these drugs: distillation, sedimentation and crystallization. Large medical schools developed in Damascus, Baghdad, Cordoba and Cairo. Ayurveda was based on balance and harmony with nature and the utilization of therapeutic diet, herbs, rituals, various physiotherapies. These principles were accordingly modified as they were assimilated by different cultures, customs and geographical conditions. In Tibetan medicine, for instance, We see an obvious blend of Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine, with the Chinese principles of 5 elements, the 3 humors, acupuncture and moxibustion. Poison, bleeding, blistering. In the 1800s, the excesses of doctors and the cottage industry drugs led to general loathing and ridicule of the medical profession by the public in USA and Europe. This is the time when a revolt, hygiene, emerged. In Canada in 1829, treatments in vogue included horseback riding for pulmonary tuberculosis, Scotch snuff plaster for croup, leek poultices for gout, and a decoction of carrots for jaundice. Dropsy was treated by bleeding, tapping, and plantain and liverwort. For at least a century, strychnine was the best remedy the profession had for palsy and paralysis. It was used to kill cats and dogs. It was deadly to hogs and cattle and, when given as a poison, slaughtered human beings. But when given as a medicine, it was a tonic, a nervine, a remedy for our palsied fellow men. During most of the last century, it was standard medical practice to withhold water from the acutely ill, and thousands of patients literally died of dehydration. Many of the patent medicines amounted to little more than cheap whiskey. Alcohol was a foundation of the many bitters that were sold to the people as tonics, as it was the chief ingredient in many of the patent nostrums sold to women for female diseases. They even sold remedies for alcoholism that were chiefly alcohol. In addition to drugging their patients to death, physicians have frequently bled them to death. Bleeding was resorted to in cases of apparent death from a fall and other injuries. Bleeding was employed in wounds and head injuries that resulted in unconsciousness. Not only were pregnant mothers bled, but physicians also drew blood from blue babies. According to the legend, Robin Hood was bled to death by a man to whom he had resorted for relief from an inflammatory disease. Indeed, the blood-loving and blood-spilling allopathists shed the vital current of their patients for over 2,000 years before they were compelled, by the opposition of other schools and rising public protest, to discontinue the bleeding of the sick. It is probable that physicians spilled more blood than all the wars during the same period. In the days of which we write, patients were bled, blistered, purged, puked, narcotized, mercurialized, and alcoholized into chronic invalidism or into the grave. The death rate was high, and the sick man who recovered without sequelae was so rare as to be negligible. It is certain that if well persons had been put to bed and subjected to the same treatment to which the sick were subjected, they would have inevitably been made very sick, and some of them would have been killed. By 1850 it was easy for a man of no particular training to attend lectures for one winter and emerge a full-fledged doctor. Revolt and reform. Hygiene and nature cure emerges in the early 1800s. Some medical doctors discovered that discontinuing drugs and surgery gave better results with their patients. New methods like fasting and raw diets were developed. Exercise and sunshine and fresh air were recommended, and a comprehensive medical theory about natural healing and health was created. In Europe, this new science was called nature cure, in USA hygiene or orthopathy. This soon became a large anti-drug and cleanliness and exercise etc. movement, one of the great reform movements, like anti-slavery, women's rights, etc., being formed around 1820 to 1850. More on the next pages. Petroleum-based industrial drugs. In the 1900s, medical doctors regained respect from the public by weeding out most of the worst excesses. This was done partly through adopting hygienic measures, like washing hands before surgery, partly through cooperation with big money to create so-called scientific medicine based on new mass-produced chemical drugs. Not only has the Rockefeller IG. Combine been instrumental in fostering chemical-based drug treatment as the basis for health care, they have been the dominant adversary against safer non-drug treatments. In the years prior to World War I, there came into existence an international cartel, centered in Germany, that dominated the entire world's chemical and drug industries and was a powerful economic and political force in all countries. It was known as IG. Farben. When John D. Rockefeller interlocked his American-based international empire with that of IG. Farben in 1928, there was created the largest and most powerful cartel the world has ever known. Not only has the cartel survived through the years, it has grown and prospered. In order to expand their drug operations, the Rockefellers set about educating the medical profession. Abraham Flexner, author of the famous Flexner Report of 1910, led the crusade for upgrading the medical schools of America. Carnegie and J.D. Rockefeller had set up gigantic tax-exempt foundations for that purpose. The end result was that all medical schools became heavily oriented toward drugs and drug research, for it was through the increased sale of drugs that the donors realized a profit on their donations. Late 1900s revolution. Similarly to what happened in early 1800s, there is now an emerging group of doctors in revolt, more or less, using nutrition rather than drugs. They base their ideas on anthropological findings about early man, as well as new science about the insulin mechanism. But they are still far from formulating a system of general laws for health, as was done by hygienic doctors in the 1800s. There is also a new phenomenon: all raw meat eating, the primal diet. New paradigm: disease as the solution. This concept was revolutionary when it first appeared, and still is. A new paradigm, a new way of thinking that still is new, almost 200 years later. Disease is the solution. The way to get rid of disease is stop breaking the divine laws about how to take care of one's body. The cause is obvious: wrong behavior. It is easy to avoid disease. One knows exactly how to remove disease if it appears. Example: a cold is elimination started by an overload of toxins. The cause may e.g. be overeating the day before. No big deal, just rest and sleep more, and eat less, and let the body do its cleaning job undisturbed. One knows that the cold will soon be gone. Example 2. Cancer is the last stage of continually breaking universal divine laws. Excessive toxicity is making the cells go crazy. The solution is to stop all toxins, return to a pristine mode of living, give the body maximal rest, including mental rest. Natural hygiene. History summary: hygiene became very popular in the 1800s. Both among healing practitioners and the public, but in the 1900s it lost ground to the medical, allopathic, drugging system that had gotten a powerful ally in the Rockefeller drug and oil empire. The medical system gradually did adopt the sanitation part of hygiene while rejecting its no drugs philosophy. When sanitation and hygiene as a consequence became synonymous, the prefix natural was added to hygiene. In the 1800s there was some sidetracking by hydropathy, and in the 1900s diet became a major topic, e.g. the dangers/benefits of veganism. Background: the medical art in America during the colonial period had been simple and unpretentious. There were no medical schools and few physicians. By the time the period arrived, 1800s, the schools of healing had arrived. Folk medicine was almost obsolete. A considerable medical literature with Latin and Greek terminology had accumulated. Medical colleges, schools of physic, had been established. Homeopathy and tranothermalism had come from Europe to compete with the dominant school, which became known as the allopathic school. Each school accused the other of killing its patients, an accusation which could be well substantiated against each school. In addition to this struggle, there was a widespread drug nihilism among medical men. the leading medical authorities of both Europe and America agreeing with the statement made by Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes that if all the drugs of the pharmacopoeia were cast into the sea it would be better for mankind, although a bit hard on the fishes. Is it to be wondered that the people became distrustful of their physicians and began to believe that they were being killed in the process of being cured? How is a man who is already sick to be made less so by swallowing a substance that would sicken, even kill him if he were to take it in a state of health? Whoever has had his bowels moved into convulsions by cathartics, his teeth rotted by mercurials, his liver enlarged and impaired by tartar emetic knows that the effects of drugging are many and varied, but always evil. In addition to drugging their patients to death, physicians have frequently bled them to death. Butchers bled pigs to kill them, physicians bled patients to cure them. Beginnings, early 1800s. The whole medical system of Western society was in a state of chaos and confusion. It is not surprising that the revolution had its first beginning in France, where medicine was most progressed. As early as the beginning of the 19th century, there were physicians in France who discarded drugs and relied upon nature and good nursing. Nature cure in Europe. The revolution in Europe and that in America were interrelated and interconnected. Especially did the works of Priesnitz, Schrott and Rels of Germany, Ling of Sweden and Lamencombe of Britain influence the American scene. The French school seems to have exercised very little influence outside of France. Should we marvel that the people lost confidence in their physicians and began to, correctly, suspect that they were being killed by them? A real revolutionary situation existed. The time was ripe for a change. It was into the milieu of doubt and uncertainty, of disease and death that Sylvester Graham threw a stone in 1830. Only the existence of a revolutionary situation, created by the failures and contradictions of medical theories and practices, made possible the immediate and widespread acceptance of the truths announced by Graham, his contemporaries and successors. Dr. Jennings' only water and bread pills from 1822. Isaac Jennings, M.D., after 20 years spent in the regular drugging and bleeding practices of the time, during which his confidence in drugs and bleeding had grown steadily weaker so that his lancet had been sheathed and his doses were fewer, further apart and smaller, he discontinued all drugging in 1822 and relied thereafter on hygienic care of the sick, using water, drops of it, and bread pills to meet the demands of his patients for medicines for another 20 years before he made public the secret of his phenomenal success. He noted, also, in consultation with his more experienced professional brethren, that old doctors, as a general rule, gave much less medicine than young ones. The former trusted more to nature, the latter trusted all to drugs. This led him to doubt the prevalent ideas of the faculty of medicine, and further observations induced him to discard them altogether. He furnished one pocket with an assortment of bread pills, another pocket was stored with a variety of powders made of wheat and flour, variously scented and colored, and a third pocket with a quantity of vials filled with pure, soft water, of various hues. Diseases vanished before him with a promptness unknown before. His fame spread far and wide. H. Shelton, 1968. Ch.2. Dr. Isaac Jennings, who served as Oberlin's mayor in 1849, came to Oberlin in 1839 as a physician with an honorary M.D. from Yale University. Jennings practiced a system of medicine which he termed orthopathy. Jennings lived a long life as a member of Oberlin. He died in 1875 at the age of 86. Hygiene theory. Early development. Dr. Jennings' theory of disease. Jennings continued his no-drug practice, which he called the let-alone practice, for another 20 years before he retired. He worked out a theory of disease, diverse from any that had preceded him, which he called orthopathy. H. Shelton, 1968, ch. 2. Disease, in this theory, is a unit and, in its various forms of fever, inflammation, coughs, etc., is entirely true to the laws of life, which cannot be aided by any system of medication or any medication whatever, but, relying solely upon the healing powers of the body and placing his patients in the best possible conditions for the operation of the body's own healing processes, by means of rest, fasting, diet, pure air and other hygienic factors, he permitted his patients to get well. Sylvester Graham, with the science of human life, made a great step in advance, and, though some of his theories are not what later developments would approve, he nevertheless made a valuable attempt at systematization. Herald of Health, January 1865, says of Sylvester Graham, who was not a physician, that he was preeminently the father of the philosophy of physiology. In his masterly and celebrated work, The Science of Life, he has given the world more philosophy and more truth concerning the primary and fundamental laws which relate man to external objects and to other beings, than any other author ever did, than all other authors ever have. Medical deprecations of Graham's work began very early. 1 Drive. Bell reduced Graham and Grahamism to smoldering ruins with such matchless and devastating logic as utopian dreamers, modern empirics and modern innovators, self-conceited and opinionated dogmatism, visionary novelties, new sect of fanatics, men of erratic and visionary genius, modern Pythagoreans, bigoted exclusives, etc., etc. H. Shelton, 1968, ch. 2. 3. Beginning with Graham's lectures and the publication of the Graham Journal of Health and Longevity, the hygienic movement pushed forward with vigor and enthusiasm. As early as 1850 the Water Cure Journal had a circulation of 18,000. So vigorous was hygiene promulgated and so great was the enthusiasm with which the people accepted it. It was estimated in January 1852 that the practitioners of the two schools, hydropathy and hygiotherapy, outnumbered the practitioners of any of the medical schools, allopathic, homeopathic, eclectic and physiomedical, in this country. Dr. Turl R.T. Turl, M.D. It was left to him to solve the great primary problems which must underlie all medical systems, and to base a theory of medical science and a system of the healing art on the laws of nature themselves. No author except him ever traced medical problems back to their starting point, and thereby discovered their harmony or disharmony with universal and unalterable law. In this manner he has been enabled to do what no other author before him ever could do, viz., explain the nature of disease, the effects of remedies, the doctrine of vitality, the vis medicatrix naturae, and the laws or conditions of cure. His philosophy goes back of all medical systems and proves to a positive demonstration the fallacy and falsity of medicating diseases with poisonous drugs. In 1862 Trull delivered in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington his famous lecture, The True Healing Art, or Hygienic versus Drug Medication. It should be recorded that after this lecture was delivered, there was a heavy demand that it be delivered elsewhere. Complying with this demand, Trull delivered this lecture in several other cities. Writing in November 1873, Trull said that allopathic physicians could be named both in this country and in Europe who had immediately abandoned the whole drugging system after reading The True Healing Art, and that some of them were then practicing hygienically. All history attests the fact that wherever the drug medical system prevails, desolation marks its track, human health declines, vital stamina diminishes, diseases become more numerous, more complicated, and more fatal, and the human race deteriorates. On the contrary, Wherever the hygienic healing system is adopted, and there is no exception, renovation denotes its progress, and humanity improves in all the relations of its existence. In April 1862, Trill issued a call for the formation of a National Hygienic Association, to be made up of hygienic practitioners, male and female. In 1860, Trill issued a booklet on the principles of hygiotherapy. Hygiene and hydropathy confusion. Hydropathy, using water as a drug. Hydropathy spread quickly in America. According to an account, 213 cure centers were established between 1843 and 1900. Although most treated both sexes, the centers were especially popular with women, and women who had long been denied access to the regular medical field not only gained acceptance but took the lead as water cure physicians. The introduction of hydropathy into this country occurred 22 years after Jennings had discarded the drugging system and adopted the hygienic practice. The hygienic movement was already well established and had thousands of adherents at the time of the introduction of the water cure into this country. Its books and magazines already had a wide circulation. Great numbers of physicians had lost confidence in drugs and took advantage of the water cure as a means of escaping from the drugging system. Even though they adopted more or less of hygiene in connection with their water cure practices, they called their practice hydropathy and called themselves hydropathists. Many physicians who turned to water cure thought of water as an agent that could be made to take the place of drugs altogether. In other words, they professed to be able to do with water everything that they had formerly sought to do with drugs. Hydropathy presented a totally fresh approach to childbirth, denying that it was a disease, as the allopathists seemed to believe, or that it was of necessity excruciatingly painful because it was God's punishment for Eve's sin, as many believed. Water curists taught that excessive pain in childbirth was the result of poor health. They stressed extensive exercise and proper diet during pregnancy and the relaxing effects of free movement and warm water baths during labor. Women found they could be up in about a few days after delivery. With the scientific management of allopathy, 2 months of invalidism after delivery was not uncommon. By the middle of the 19th century, women's health in America was in a deplorable state. Catherine Beecher, sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, made an informal survey of over 1,000 women and found that the sick outnumbered the well by a ratio of 3 to 1. Mrs. Beecher's suggested remedies for women's poor health were 3: dress reform, vigorous exercise, and participation in the water cure. Separating hygiene and hydropathy, the practices of the early hygienists were a composite mixture of hygiene and hydropathy, while most of the practitioners were designated as hydropathists. Writing on the health reform movement in December 1853, William Alcott, M.D., 1798-1859, designates the physiological, hygienic, as distinct from the hydropathic part of the movement. He mentions also that our periodicals and our books also repudiate as absurd the idea of curing disease, and that all the elements of hygiene, and these only, are the true materia medica. It is important that we keep these distinctions in mind. The physiological reform, hygiene, had its origin in this country. Hydropathy had its origin in Europe. The two movements mingled and ran along together for a time, but they were separate and distinct and must be understood in this way if we are to grasp in clear outline the evolution of the hygienic system. In an editorial in the journal, May 1858, Charles speaks of those who do not distinguish between water treatment and hygienic treatment, thus setting the two systems apart from each other. At least as early as 1853, Trill's institution was listed as a hydropathic and hygienic institute. When people discontinued the use of tea, coffee, tobacco, alcohol and animal foods, they were following Graham and Alcott, not Priesnitz. Instead of being a revolutionary movement, hydropathy, turned out to be a mere reform movement. Instead of calling for radical changes in the ways of life, it sought merely to substitute water in the form of baths, hot and cold applications, enemas, douches, packs, fomentations, dripping wet sheets, etc., for drugs. Such treatments have no legitimate place in a system of hygiene. Natural hygiene. Early medical doctors abandon drugs when a man begins to doubt the drug system. It is difficult to stop. An example of the transforming power of a new idea is supplied us by Dr. James C. Jackson's, M.D., conversion to hydropathy. He explains in 1861 that he had no more desire to disbelieve his allopathic education than he had to become an infidel in religion, but he had come face to face with a group of facts. He had seen a number of patients recover health from apparently hopeless conditions without drugs. Within a few months these so-called incurables were walking about quite vigorously and ultimately returned home in good health. He reasoned to himself, what power is it that has done this work? He answers, one naturally would, under such a glimmer of light as I had, be disposed to ascribe the result to some specific agent. Jackson thus repeated an old and common mistake, that of mistaking coincidence for cause. And the healing power of the body is always ignored. H. Shelton, 1968. It is because the world stands so much in need of this knowledge that we are determined to make it available to those who might come within the sphere of our influence. And though we have had to suffer as almost all persons who undertake the promulgation of new truths, we have been able to endure, and that is what always wins new victories. James C. Jackson Health Conventions. The movement initiated by Graham and Alcott and measurably contributed to by Mary Gove, and which was early joined by Dr. Jennings, represents the beginning of the hygienic movement. This was only the beginning, and many subsequent men, especially Trull, Taylor, Nichols and Jackson, added their weight in thought and their experience to the evolution of the new but old way of life. Two health conventions were held by the American Physiological Society, founded in 1837 by Sylvester Graham, under the general term of the American Health Convention. The first of these opened in Boston 1838. The second was held in New York 1839. Physiological societies were formed in several cities, and a provision store, which may properly be called the world's first health food store. Colleges and Civil War. In 1853 Dr. Trull founded the New York College of Hygiotherapy, and half of the first-class graduates were women. In 1858 Drs. Austin and Jackson founded a 250-bed institution in New York, our home on the hillside. Ellen White, a hygienist and Seventh-day Adventist, called for health reform in the name of the Lord in many books between 1864 and 1915. Clara Barton, a hygienist, founded the Red Cross in 1881. In 1887 Dr. Susanna Dodds founded the Hygienic College of Physicians and Surgeons. The Civil War 1861-65 had a devastating impact. General impoverishment caused the closing of hygienic colleges, magazines and institutions. Hygiene never regained its dominant position. Hygiene influences medicine. Neglect of the hygienic needs, especially of the need for rest, fresh air and water, is not as persistent nor as criminal today, thanks to the work of hygienists, hydropathists and nature curists, as it was 100 years ago. But the total hygienic program is far from having been accepted. By line upon line, precept upon precept and volume upon volume, the workers for a revolution in the way of life have done a good job. Jackson declared that the changes in medical practices that occurred during his lifetime had been due clearly and wholly to the promulgation of the principles of hygiene. 1. Theory develops. What is the real cause of disease? Enervation and toxemia. John Tilden, M.D., 1851 to 1940, first practiced medicine and surgery for 25 years. Personal experience, however, led him gradually to lose all faith in drugs, and like Jennings, he began to use sugar tablets, blank cartridges, he called them, which he continued to give, to use his own words, until I was mentally evolved to the truth that even sugar pills were injurious, in that the make-believe medication educated my patients into believing that their improvement was due to the supposed drug they were taking. This is the harm in doing for sick people anything labeled curative. Dr. Tilden finally gave up the placebo practice and learned to rely upon hygiene. He established an institution in Denver, Colorado, to care for the sick along natural hygiene lines, where he remained until his death in 1940. An interesting tidbit, Dr. Tilden recommended a silver dollar size of raw chopped meat per day. 25 years I practiced the science of medicine. During most of that time I did not know why people were sick, got well, nor why they died. When visiting the sick, I had no idea of how I should find them at the next call. I did not know if the disease would end soon or late. I did not know if it would take on a severe form, or quickly run its course. I did not know whether or not there would be complications. In fact, I did not know anything that would make me comfortable regarding the outcome of the disease. I had the usual stock and trade subterfuges that are worked off on a confiding public. For example, if no complications arise, the patient will recover. I defy the so-called best practitioners to undertake to prove that what I am saying is not true. Not one can tell from one day to another how his patients will be. Not one can say with any certainty that the drug he prescribes will have the action he hopes to experience. Not one can tell, after the first 24 hours of medication, whether the symptoms presenting themselves are those of disease proper or due to drugs. To sum up, no doctor knows anything definite about his patients after the first day's drugging. Every honest doctor will admit that there is an unknown quantity about every case he treats which forces him to guess if asked to give his opinion. The toxin theory of the healing art is grounded on the truth that toxemia is the basic source of all diseases. So sure and certain is this truth that I do not hesitate to say that it is by far the most satisfactory theory that has been advanced in all the history of medicine. It is a scientific system that covers the whole field of cause and effect, a system that synthesizes with all knowledge, hence a true philosophy. When this truth first began to force itself upon me, years ago, I was not sure but that there was something wrong with my reasoning. I saw that it would bring me very largely in opposition to every established medical treatment. I held back, and argued with myself. I fought to suppress giving open utterance to a belief that would, in all probability, cause me to be hissed at, subject me to the jeers and gibes of the better class of people, both lay and professional. Little by little I have proved the truth of my theory. I have tried it out daily for the past 20 years. I myself have personally stood the brunt of my experimenting, and have willingly suffered because of it. Every day this trying out of the theory has convinced me more and more that toxemia is the universal cause of disease. As has been stated continuously in my writings for the past dozen years, the habits of overeating, overclothing, and excesses of all kinds use up nerve energy. When the nerve supply is not equal to the demands of the body, organic functioning is impaired, resulting in the retention of waste products. This produces toxemia. Man can be enervated, yet not sick, but he cannot be poison sick without being enervated. Dr. Tilden tells us that it was at the cook stove that he learned that how a sick kitten clings to heat, that in caring for animals, he first learned that the sick creature will not eat. These two lessons were later to bear fruit in his practice. Enervation and toxemia and deficiency. In the 20th century, Dr. Gian Kurgia started emphasizing deficiency more, probably due to his experiences with deaths and diseases from vegan deficiencies. Here Drive Base, a student of Kurgia, explains, generally speaking, diseases are caused by any or all of three factors, namely, enervation, toxemia or deficiency. Toxemia. There are two sources of toxemia. Toxemia, which is caused by the ingestion and accumulation of substances which are foreign to the body and toxic in nature, such as chemicals, drugs, etc. These produce irritation, inflammation and pathology in bodily organs and systems. Toxemia, which is due to the accumulation of toxic wastes resulting from the food and beverages we eat and drink, unnatural food or natural food in excess beyond what the body can use at the moment. Retention of this excess leads to decomposition of the food and the production of irritating and toxic chemical wastes, which provide a fertile field for the growth of microbes and various species of bacteria, which further increase the toxic state. Deficiencies, the insufficiency of necessary food substances, such as carbohydrates, proteins, fats, minerals, vitamins, enzymes, etc., lead to breakdown of cells, tissues and organs, which is given names of diseases, according to its location. Enervation. John Henry Tilden, M.D., formulated a theory of the cause of diseases due to a recurring cycle of enervation and toxemia. Enervation is the reduction or loss of energy occasioned by the lack of rest or sleep, or the excessive use of emotion, negative thoughts, worry, stress, or the overdoing of physical actions, overeating, etc. Dr. Stanley S. Bass, how important is diagnosis? Read more in S magazine. What is disease? Toxemia, retained body wastes and metabolic toxins. Enervation, loss of energy which causes slowdown and retention of body waste leading to. These produce further enervation or weakening of body energies leading to greater and increased toxemia, establishing a recurring vicious cycle until a saturated toxemic state is produced, forcing an elimination process called acute disease. Energy loss is also caused by the use of toxic stimulants such as coffee, tea, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, environmental poisons, etc. Also negative mental and emotional states, loss of rest and sleep. Processed foods, altered foods, preservatives, food colorings and many toxic chemicals added to flavor foods, irradiation, overcooking, etc. contribute to toxemia and enervation. Also included are overeating, especially overexercising or overwork. A waste of energy. Deficiencies caused by refining of food, which removes vital substances or food from depleted soils. This is very common and almost worldwide in prevalence today. 2. Theory develops. Laws of life. Laws of health. What is the laws of life? Essentially, the manual, the key to understanding how we function and why we are sick or healthy. If you understand and follow these laws, you'll be healthy. If you break them, you will get sick. The laws of life are not something imposed upon the organization of man. They are embedded in the very structure of our being, in our tissues, our nerve and muscle cells, our bloodstream, into the total organism. Since these laws are fundamental parts of us, we cannot revolt against them without revolting against ourselves. We cannot run away from the laws of being without running away from ourselves. There simply is no escape, except in death. Here are a couple of the laws. Energy is the basis. Robert Walter M.D., 1841–1924, is credited with beginning to formulate the laws of life, or laws of vitality as he called them, including the basis, life's great law. It states that the overriding goal is self-preservation/survival, and that the success of life depends upon the amount of energy available. Lots of energy equals health, while low energy equals disease. Life's great law. Every living cell of the organized body is endowed with an instinct of self-preservation, sustained by an inherent force in the organism called vital force or life force or nerve energy. The success of each living organism, whether it be simple or complex, is directly proportional to the amount of its life force and inversely proportional to the degree of its activity. This basic energy law has four secondary laws of vital relation. 1. The law of action. 2. The law of power. 3. The law of dual effects. And 4. The law of vital accommodation. Space. The laws of life. 1. Dead things cannot act. A very common error today. You hear it all the time. This drug or herb will do something, will give more energy, will remove pain, and so on. Wrong. Dead things, in the form of drugs, cannot act. Only the body has power of action. The law of action. Whenever action occurs in the living organism, as the result of extraneous influences, the action must be ascribed to the living thing, which is the power of action, and not to the dead, whose leading characteristic is inertia. 2. Vital power comes from within. Even if it looks like taking a drug creates an immediate relief, there is no power in the drug itself. The relief is due to an action by a body that has enough vital power. The law of power. The power employed, and consequently expended, in any vital or medicinal action is vital power, that is, power from within and not from without. 3. Body reaction to a drug changes with time to the opposite. Whenever drug is taken, what looks like relief at this, vitality being redirected, from the original problem, to deal with the new poisonous threat, the drug. The body deals with the drug immediately, first priority. This is the first effect, stimulation. The second effect is a state of weakness. E.g., alcohol appears to strengthen for a while, but is soon followed by diminished function and weakness. The law of dual effects. All agents which are taken into the body or which come in contact with it from without occasion a twofold and contrary action in time. The secondary or reactive action being the opposite of the active or primary one. 4. To survive, destroy, or adapt to poison, you cannot steer the body's reactions. They are always automatic and instinctive, with this single goal, self-preservation and survival. If a drug enters, the body can react in two ways: either throw out the toxin, or adapt itself by working at a lower vitality level. The law of vital accommodation. The response of the vital organism to external stimuli is an instinctive one, based upon a self-preservative instinct which adapts or accommodates itself to whatever influence it cannot destroy or control. 3. Theory develops. Diseases and stages. 1930s. From flu to cancer. Dr. Tilden's revolutionary writings in the 1930s explained the 7 stages of disease and what happens when our energy level gets lower and lower. Note that a sick person can move down the steps, get worse, or up, get better. It is simple cause and effect, and we have power to reverse the trend. The 7 stages of disease. Stage 1 is enervation. Nerve energy is so reduced or exhausted that all normal bodily functions are greatly impaired, especially the elimination of endogenous and exogenous poisons. Stage 1 thus begins the progressive and chronic process of toxemia toleration that continues through all of the following stages. The toxic sufferer does not feel his normal self. He feels either stimulated or depressed by the poisonous overload. Stage 2 is toxemia. Nerve energy is too low to eliminate metabolic wastes and ingested poisons. These toxic substances begin to saturate first the bloodstream and lymphatic fluids and then the cells themselves. The toxic sufferer feels inordinately tired, run down, and out of it. Stage 3 is irritation. Toxic buildup within the blood and lymph and tissues continues. The cells/tissues where buildup occurs are irritated by the toxic nature of the waste, resulting in a low-grade inflammation. The toxic sufferer can feel exhausted, queasy, irritable, itchy, even irrational and hostile. During these first 3 stages, if the toxic sufferer does consult a medical doctor about the reason for his low energy and irritability, the doctor tells him, "There is nothing wrong with you. These symptoms are all in your head. You are perfectly healthy." Stage 4 is inflammation. The low-grade, chronic inflammation from stage 3 is leading to the death of cells. An area or organ where toxicants have amassed next becomes fully inflamed. The toxic sufferer experiences actual pain, along with pathological symptoms at this point. With the appearance of these symptoms, the medical doctor can finally give the sufferer's complaint a name. Traditionally, medical scientists have named many of the 20,000 distinctly different diseases after the site where the toxins have accumulated and precipitated their symptoms. Once the set of symptoms is conveniently named, the doctor can mechanically prescribe the antidote from his physician's desk reference or from his memorized medical/pharmaceutical repertoire. Standard medical doctors thus commence drugging and treating at this stage. Stage 5 is ulceration. Tissues are destroyed. The body ulcerates, forming an outlet for the poisonous buildup. The toxic sufferer experiences a multiplication and worsening of symptoms while the pain intensifies. Standard medical doctors typically continue drugging and often commence with surgery and other forms of more radical and questionable treatment at this stage. Stage 6 is induration. Induration is the result of long-standing, chronic inflammation with bouts of acute inflammation interspersed. The chronic inflammation causes an impairment or sluggishness of circulation, and because some cells succumb, they are replaced with scar tissue. This is the way we lose good, normal functioning cells by chronic inflammation and death of cells. Toxins may or may not be encapsulated in a tumor, sac, or polyp. The toxic sufferer endures even more physical pain, which is intensified by the emotional distress of realizing that he is only getting worse, regardless of his earnest, obedient, even heroic attempts to get well. Standard medical doctors continue with both drugging and surgery and all other kinds of modalities deemed appropriate, both conventional and experimental. Induration means hardening or scarring of tissues. Stage 7 is irreversible degeneration and/or fungation, cancer. Cellular integrity is destroyed through their disorganization and/or cancerous proliferation. Tissues, organs, and whole systems lose their ability to function normally. Biochemical and morphological changes from the depositing of endogenous and exogenous toxins bring about degenerations and death at the cellular level. The toxic sufferer is a pathological mess. He is on his deathbed. Standard medical doctors declare at this stage, there is no hope left. You have just so much longer to live. You need to make preparations accordingly. Failure of vital organs eventually results in death. 4. Theory develops. System building. Dr. Herbert Shelton. Cleaning and organizing. Dr. Herbert M. Shelton, 1895 to 1984, was a brilliant man with unique abilities and happened to be the right man for the right job, reviving hygiene and creating a complete hygienic system. It was my effort to revive a movement that had been allowed to all but die. The message of natural hygiene is now heard around the world. Herbert Shelton, Cleanup. Dr. Shelton took the old hygienic writings and separated the real stuff from the therapies. He removed the junk and made hygiene intelligent. He cleaned up hygiene, e.g. by removing hydropathic ideas. Organization. He organized the collected knowledge, while giving credit to the hygienic masters. Systematization. He systematized hygiene to create a system of pure basic principles and lifted natural hygiene up to a higher stage. Dr. Shelton was always on top of the latest research and commented on it. He would just listen, and when he spoke he was usually analytically correct. His decision to choose a vegan diet concept and abandon Dr. Tilden's chopped raw meat may have been his largest mistake from today's perspective, but it was based on contemporary science. He gave his whole life to the cause of cleaning up and recreating hygiene. He often worked almost all night on writing his books using his extensive library, writing the monthly magazine Hygienic Review, and during the day taking care of patients at his health school together with Dr. Vetrano in his lifetime doing the labor of many men. He did a lot of writing, 40+ books, and gave many lectures, sometimes in a not too easy to digest style. Herbert Shelton had a great sense of humor and told lots of stories. He was sure of himself, had humility, and honored the old hygienic masters and those with more knowledge. He was principled, with a very high accuracy rate, and he was a fearless warrior for the truth, jailed up to 30 times. He was not always diplomatic but could be a skilled politician. Herbert M. Shelton. Herbert Shelton first became acquainted with the system at the tender age of 17, 1912. He started to probe into its past and single-handedly exhumed the vast storehouse of knowledge that lay neglected and unread. Beginning in 1919, he began sifting, selecting and testing what those who had gone before had left as a heritage. Shelton became increasingly determined that there must be a renaissance in natural hygiene. His formal education in the health field was obtained at the International College of Drugless Physicians in Chicago, which was founded by Bernard McFadden in 1920. The college, despite its name, was more like that of drills, in its curriculum and principles, than any subsequent college. In 1922, he graduated from the American School of Naturopathy and did postgraduate work at the Peerless College of Chiropractic in Chicago. In order to obtain clinical experience, Shelton interned in various institutions before setting up practice for himself. From 1925 to 1928 he was on the staff of McFadden's Physical Culture magazine and was the health columnist for the New York Evening Graphic. His articles were hard-hitting and impressive in their message on health and disease, especially so was the one on Rudolph Valentino and his untimely death brought on by medication. Year 1928. The year 1928 was a landmark in the 20th century natural hygiene movement, for 3 reasons. Dr. Shelton became co-founder and co-owner of How to Live magazine, which laid the groundwork for his Hygienic Review, a publication which came out 11 years later and earned for itself recognition as the most informative journal on health and disease for the layperson. Secondly, he established an institution to care for the sick through physiological resting, or fasting, which provided a living laboratory of the physiology of health recovery. Lastly, Dr. Shelton published his first great work, Human Life, Its Philosophy and Laws, which incorporated much of the teachings of the pioneers, and was the forerunner of a host of other volumes on correct living for the prevention of disease and the recovering of health. Dr. Shelton's Hygienic Review. It was fortunate that before Dr. Tilden's death in 1940, which brought to an end his Health Review and Critique, that Dr. Shelton's Hygienic Review made its debut, September 1939, and thus left unbroken the continuity of magazines devoted to the hygienic idea which have been published came into being in 1832. Dr. Shelton's hygienic review was never able to pay for itself, yet it continued each month without missing an issue, even during the difficult days of World War II when help was scarce and paper rationed. Never did it double up on 2 months as did many other publications. Dr. Shelton humorously relates how he managed to almost single-handedly put out the magazine, while at the same time operate his institution in San Antonio, Texas. I would make beds, sweep floors, serve meals, wash dishes. Often after getting through with the noonday dishes, I would hop into my car and give my printer a hand in getting out the magazine. If our theory is true, that disease is vital action abnormally expressed, then to our minds it follows, irresistibly, that such means as the organism needs and must have to keep itself in health are the means and the only means, which it needs and must have to restore lost ground. What are these means? To settle this question, we have merely to provide a satisfactory answer to the question, what are hygienic materials? By hygienic agents, said Troll, the hygienist means things normal. Briefly, they are food, water, air, light, heat, activity, rest and sleep, cleanliness and wholesome emotional influences. Hygienic materials have nothing in common, in the body, with the remedies of the physician. Throughout the whole realm of nature we find nothing provided for the repair of injury, except that which is consistent with the health of the body when uninjured. Look with us at the relations of life to which the sick are subjected. One may be constitutionally feeble and it may be that he has been sick all his life. Yet physicians do to him, steadily and persistently, what no argument could induce them to do for the plants in their garden. Instead of caring for the sick as they would a valuable rose bush, nursing him or her, watching over the patient, waiting upon him and giving the forces of life a chance, instead of keeping things away that exhaust and providing things that nourish, all the dregs and scum of earth and sea are employed in a vain effort to restore health without any consideration being given to the causes of the disease. As the living organism, well or sick is the same organism, and as there is no radical change in its structures or its functions and no radical change in its elemental needs in the two states of existence, we need a system of care that is equally applicable to both the well and the sick. Most people's prejudices against the hygienic system arise out of the very simplicity of its means and methods. So long have we been educated to belittle and deprecate the simple health requirements of nature and to rely upon the mysterious and incomprehensible and to misunderstand the nature of disease and to grossly overrate the danger of certain conditions, that we find ourselves entirely unable to appreciate the adequacy of the means employed in hygienic practice to the accomplishment of the ends sought. We are frequently asked, where are experiments? Do we need experiments to prove that man cannot live without air? Are we called upon to prove that fresh air is better than foul? Must we show experimentally that rest and sleep are nature's processes of recuperation? Must we demonstrate the value of cleanliness? Are experiments needed today to convince us that violent emotions are ruinous? Have we so far forgotten the benefits of exercise that we need them demonstrated to us in the laboratory? After all the experiments that have been performed, that confirm the experiences that processed and refined foods are inadequate to meet man's nutritive needs, do we need more experiments to demonstrate this fact all over again? Can we not accept the very means by which we live without having to have their value demonstrated in the laboratory? The medical profession, through every means at its command, has long taught people to poison themselves with deadly drugs whenever they were ill. They have long, too long, taught the doctrine of casting out devils through Beelzebub. In the days of our ignorance this may have been permissible. But now light has come into the world. A new dispensation has dawned. Evil must be overcome with good. Disease must be limited by supplying the conditions of health, not by producing new diseases. The medical profession no longer serves any possible end. The eyes of the people are being opened to the hard consequences of medicine's false philosophy and fatal practices. The profession, its philosophy and its practices should pass and be forgotten. 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 And be forgotten.